like I say, we have a low barrier of entry industry. We
Right.
have very high compensation on the top end, but there's a great divide between the ones that make it and the ones that don't, right? And you have to have a level of intensity, you have to have like a fire ability, and then you have to have a deep desire to make it happen. It's not an industry for everybody, right? It's okay, but that's
Right.
that real estate ownership has been a way to control wealth and power across the world since the beginning of time. So the education of real estate, like think about the term land lord, right? Like what
Yeah.
are we talking about? I mean, it's a big deal. It's
Our turnover in that office is 92% per day. I'm like, how does that happen? How
right.
do you get a 92% turnover? Well, John, thank you for coming on today. I've been waiting to get you on here. I want to introduce you to our followers. So, John, you've got 32 years in commercial real estate, 25 years as a CCIM. You had a podcast called The Crossman Conversation. And the reason I wanted you on today is this book that you authored. I'm really excited about hearing about it. It's called Career Killer, Career Builder. The book delves into the pitfalls and pathways to success in commercial real estate. It is a two-parter. What are the biggest career killers that new CRA professionals often fall prey to? I'm anxious to hear all those. And second part is on what key habits or approaches you can identify as essential career builders for those entering the CRE industry. So I'm really anxious to talk about this, John. But first of all, what made you write this book? I mean, 32 years in the business, you took the time to write this to help new people coming into the industry. What was your motivation here?
Well, first, thanks for having me. It's
You
good to
bet.
be with you, so I appreciate the time. I've been guest lecturing at colleges and universities for probably close to 25 years, for a long time. I was young in the business. I started right when I was 21 years old. I think I
Okay.
like my first official day after being an intern, but official at business. It was my 22nd birthday, and I had success early on, and I looked really young. And so early in my career, people were asking me to come talk to college students and give them advice about how to build a career in real estate. After doing that for years, I was actually driving to the University of Florida. I was getting ready to give a lecture to them. It was their master's of real estate program, which is the number one program in the United States. And Joe started reflecting on, first off, anybody can talk to them about cap rates. Like anybody can talk about all different real estate trends. I was trying to think, what do I need to say to them that's different, right? What's the thing that's not getting said, right? The second thing I started thinking about is like when you got kids that are at great real estate programs like UCLA or San Diego or
Mhm.
University of Wisconsin. There's great programs all across the country, SMU, and if they're all getting these degrees in between 20 24 in that range, 10 years later, they should all be just like dominant, right? They should just be like the biggest players in the industry, and some will be,
Mhm.
but some of them won't be. And you and I both lived long enough that, we've seen tragedy, right? Like, if I started listing out, like, name a commercial real estate player that ended up, committing suicide, or they, went bankrupt, or they got arrested, like, or they thrice divorced or something, where you're like, man, that could not have been the plan. How does that happen? How does some go this way and then some go that way? And if we let's not talk about real estate for a second. Let's just talk about like Anthony Bourdain. How does that happen? How does
Mm.
Kate Spade happen? How does Aaron Hernandez happen? Like we could go if you Google celebrity suicides, it's endless. It's the most powerful, influential people. Like, how does that happen? So I started thinking, if I'm lecturing these college students and they're top notch and they're in their 20s, and 10 years from now they could be here or here, what do they need to know? Right.
Mm.
So I wrote this speech called The Top Five Ways to Get Fired. I gave that lecture at University of Florida. In fact, that very lecture is on my YouTube channel. You can go watch it. It's funny, it looks old now, but back then it was a big
Sure.
deal. And funny enough, that became the most requested lecture. Like I stopped having colleges ask me to come talk about, the trends in real estate. And instead they said, can you give that speech? So I've given that speech at probably 30 different universities across the country. And that's all these were the ones I got the best response from. So I took that speech and I, created a book out of that because, it's just like some of things in life, you could sort of see there was something there. And when I start talking about career killers and career builders, I don't talk about showing up late or not making eye contact or something like that. What I start talking about is like, hey, sleeping with your coworkers or, having a drug addiction. I'm really going into very, killers, like bad, like this kind of thing. When I get into the career builders, I start talking about things that can help prevent those things. So I really move into a pretty vulnerable space for myself, and hopefully with the audience, helping them kind of step into what's the why that's creating the dysfunction that then they can work on.
Yeah. I'd like to, obviously you just told us some of the career killers. Can we do things that we should really be watching out for? Because, the turnover in our industry is super high. I mean, I was talking to a broker the other day that just left another company. Goes, listen, our turnover in that office is 92% for new people. I'm like, well, how does that happen? How do you get a 92% turnover? And so I think there's things that, younger people getting the industry can be asking before they're even coming on board. And so could you kind of walk us through what your idea is for something like that, please?
Yeah, I think the first thing is really having proper expectation. If you're 20 years old and you said, you know what, I want to be a surgeon. I want to be a surgeon. By the time I'm 35, I want to be in the operating room doing surgery. And so if somebody said that, like, hey, that's awesome. And when you're 35 and you're doing surgery, what do you expect to make? And they might say, oh, I want to be making 400 grand a year. Okay. So if you're 20 and you're 35 as a surgeon, you want to make 400 grand a year. What do you have to do from 20 to 35? And you and I both know what the answer is. You're going to have to work like you wouldn't believe. You're going to have to go to all these college courses. You're going to have to go up, have no other life. You're not going to be able to have a big personal life. You're not going to do, be in a kickball league or something like that. You're going to have to be study. And then once you become a doctor, all the different things you got to do. And then the back end of that is you have that job. Well, if you're 20 and you're like, man, I want to get in commercial real estate. Okay. Well, if you're in commercial real estate, you're successful and you're 35, what do you think you should be making? 400 grand. Okay. Well, what do you need to do to get there? And there's no way you're going to get there working 9 to 5. It doesn't work that way, right? If you're like, well, I want to work 7 to 7 Monday through Friday, and I want to work, probably a half day Saturday. Yeah, that's what that looks like, right? So when I think about those 92%, I'm willing to bet a lot of them is if you said, probably all of them, if you said, hey, do you want to make 400 grand a year? They probably all said yes. Well, are you willing to show up and work 7 to 7, 5 days a week and at least a half a day on a Saturday for 10 straight years? I think that probably 90% said no. That's the problem.
Right.
And Joe, can I tell you a story about that real quick? Can I tell you a story?
Please.
All right. So this is you think defining moments of my career. So I started in 1993. And in 1993, they sent my entire company to Vegas for the ICSC conference, and they left me at home. I was a kid. I was 22. So the next year, I'm 23. They sent all of us. I'm there and everybody. The next year, I'm 24. They only sent me. They left home all the senior guys. They only sent me. And you're thinking, why? How did that happen? What happened was that year the economy was tight, and the CEO, who was based in Charlotte, North Carolina, said, we're going to limit the amount of people. He goes, I don't know what Crossman was doing last year, but send that guy, right? Well, what was I doing? Well, Joe, I had no idea what I was doing. I was a kid, but here's what I did. I was the first guy in the booth on the convention floor every day. I was the first guy. So it's Las Vegas. It's, 7 a.m. No one's showing up till 8:30 or whatever. I was there in the booth at 7 a.m., ready to go, suit, tie, everything. Joe, who was the second guy to show up every morning? The CEO, right?
Yeah.
And then when I wasn't in a meeting, I was working the room and networking. And I've had guys recently now, those old guys have told people oh yeah, I mentored John Crossman. They didn't mentor me, Joe. I sought them out. I went to them and asked them. They weren't coming to me, right? And then I would not leave the booth. I did not leave it until every other person left. Okay. So when that gentleman sold his company, I was 27 years old, and I was named as senior vice president at Tremble Crow Company at 27. How does that happen? When he sold his company, he told the CEO of Tremble Crow Company, he goes, Crossman's the guy you want to watch. And I really, so much was I showed up early, I stayed late, had a great attitude, and I just hustled. And I will tell you that huge segments of my career till today, if you had a camera following me and the camera was overviewing and look at me at my desk and it went back and did this, you would see a sea of empty desk, right? There's just a big component of it that's putting time in. and you have to want to put the time in, right?
Yeah.
There's no escaping it. Like
No.
it's like you can't become a surgeon without going to a lot of medical school. Doesn't work that way. You can't become a major player in this business without really having an intensity about you. I don't know anybody in our business that's successful that doesn't kind of work like a wild man. I mean, do you?
Yeah.
You know
Yeah.
anybody
No,
that
I just was sitting in with our new agents. We've got 4 of them that are training right now this morning. And, I said, you're essentially running a startup for yourself.
right,
You've got to have that mindset. I said, I want you to think about every day that you're not giving it 100%. Who are you hurting the most? And you could kind of see their eyes light up. Yeah, and I wasn't lecturing these guys. I was just having a conversation with them about it, about my path. George Pino is the CEO of our company. He does the training every morning at 8:30 because we do serious training. We're 8:30 every morning, 5 days a week for the new agents. Then again at 5 o'clock, we close out the day with training. So I just stepped into this morning and they were talking about it. And I said, you've got to have the mindset. But, one thing that we run into, John, is finding those people that have that mindset. I think we've mostly noticed it since COVID that, I've had people that are new and they're like, well, I just got my license, but I want to work from home. And I'm like, well, if we had a serious training, you're going to be in training for a year to 18 months in our company. And I said, and before you even get on the phones, it's going to be a few weeks of training that you're going to be in here and doing this. Before we'd let you on the phone. I need you to be the best real estate agent in that area, in that asset class. And, I said, but if you want to come in and talk, I'll send you a calendar invite. Yeah, I mean, those calendar invites we get returned. Very few of them. But the ones
right.
that do stick typically.
Yeah, that's right. Well, like I say, we have a low barrier of entry industry.
Right.
We have very high compensation on the top end, but there's a great divide between the ones that make it and the ones that don't, right? You have to have a level of intensity. You have to have like a fire in the belly, and then you have to have a deep desire to make it happen. It's not an industry for everybody, right? It's okay,
Yeah, it's not. But man, what a career you can build for yourself. I mean, everybody's going to go, these guys are so negative on it, but we're not. We're telling you, if you got into any business and it's a startup, this is what you're going to do. The thing is, with a brokerage, it's not you just going alone. You've got a senior director or a senior person that's giving you some guidance. And so in fact, it's a lot easier.
Well, I would say this is that here's the other side of it. Like on positive things is, I don't know what it looks like to ask for time off. I don't know. Like for 32 years, if something's going on with one of my kids, I just go to it, right? Like, if there's my mom, needs something, I go take care of my mom. And like my wife calls me, I answer the call, right? Like, I think about the volunteer work I've done. I do whatever volunteer work I want to do. And if there's an event and it's in the morning and I just do it. So I have complete and total control of my time and always have, right? And so while I work a lot, it's my choice and I choose when I work a lot too, right? So when I want to take time off, I just take time off.
Yeah.
So, that's the opposite side. That's the benefit of it, right?
I've got a friend of mine. She's been in business about 5-6 years. And it's almost impossible for me to get on the phone because she's traveling all the time. But she's built a team around her where she can do that. She's still making several $100,000 a year, and I never know where she's at. But she's got this incredible group that she's assembled. She's built this team around her that just have it all taken care of, and she's still the face, but you just never know where she's at. She doesn't miss a phone call. She'll get back to me in a few days, but because I never know if she's on a flight. But the opportunity is in this business to really build yourself a solid career, and
for sure,
I love it.
Absolutely.
How do we, as somebody wanting to get into this industry, what should I be looking for in a brokerage?
What should we look for in the company that you're going to go work for?
In the company.
All right, so that's a great question because I was just thinking about this other day. I was driving because somebody asked me about this. So I have been a broker working for a national firm, like with an international presence, and then I've worked, in a startup, and of course the company I have today is, I've got 8 employees. So I've worked regional, national, international, and then local. And here's the big thing I'll tell you is It's made no difference whatsoever to me. What's mattered is my hustle. And if you hustle and you make it happen, it really works well to you. So let me start with that. Like some people, I had somebody recently, like, why don't you work for a big firm? And I'm like, there's no value in a big firm for me, like what I'm doing. So not saying that they don't have it, they do. It's just for me. So like the first thing is like, it starts with you. The second thing is, regardless of what firm you're at, if you're younger, it's who your direct report is, right? If you're working at a small little boutique firm, but your boss has a experience in coaching and mentoring, they know what they're doing, go for it. If you're going to go work for a big firm and the person you're reporting to has a lot of experience in networking, mentoring, things like that, go work for it. Colliers Orlando just hired a guy named Alex Evans that's running their central market, and I adore that guy. I think he's so great. I was just the other day, I was looking, I saw it on LinkedIn. I'm like, that is awesome. Like, if I was, a young person, I go work for that guy. Like, that's fantastic. Like, I think the world of him. But you could be working with the greatest brokerage company in America and your direct supervisor is terrible. Forget it. Absolutely forget it. So it's got to be about you. And then it's about who you're directly reporting to, right? Your direct report. And then I would go to, then it's the team that's around you. Now, wherever you are, it's going to be hard, right? Whatever going to be hard. And one of the dumbest things I've seen young people do is they jump too much and they make lots of, like little, horizontal kind of jumps. They just kind of move around. They're not trying to jump and move up. They're just sort of jumping around. And I tell people, look, wherever you make the jump in brokerage, commit 5 years. Just put your head down and say, I'm going to work here 5 years. When you get done with 5 years, then ask yourself, well, will I renew for another 5 years? And so I was at, Trammell Crow Company 5 years. When I was up 5 years, I got boom, did another 5 years. When my 10 years was up, I remember thinking, I'm going to start looking around and thinking, what's my next move? And I left after 13 years. But here's the thing, wherever you are, there's going to be people there that you don't like and they don't like you. There's going to be things about it that don't work. And by the way, like, and maybe it's you. Like, and I know for me, like, when I left Trammell Crow Company, there's things I hated about it. And then I got to my next company, which I was a partner with, and I noticed that some of the same things were happening. Well, what's the commonality? It's me. Like there was actually some things in me that I needed to work on. But I think there's a lot of value in just being committed, right? And then within that committed space, pull everything you can out of that company. And I'll tell you a funny story about Trammell Crow Company. They would have classes. They would have like HR classes or management or leadership classes. I signed up for all of them. I can't tell you times I'd be in an HR class and I'd be the only broker in the room, but they were free. I just signed up for them. When I was previous before, I was at Face and that got bought by Trammell Crow. You mentioned my CCM. I read the company handbook for Faison, and in the company handbook, it said, if you take a professional development course, they'll reimburse up to $500. So guess what? Every year I took a CCM class, would pass the class, turn it in, and get reimbursed $500. In my last year, when I went to wrap up my CCM, I went to my boss and I said, can I have $1,000 this year? And I said, I'll pass the class first, prove I did it, could reimburse. So I got all of my CCM paid through that program. When I got it all done, the head of HR nationally for Faison told me, he said, John, we have 1,500 employees. You're the only person that asked for the money. I was the only one. Yeah. Right? So it's nothing, right? And again, going over to Trammell Crow, it was the same kind of thing. Like they'd have some sort of, I just remember sitting through the HR classes and they would be shocked their broker would be in the room. But I always thought, you know what? I may want to own my business one day. I want to know, how do you handle this? How do you handle these problem issues, right? So here's another one. At Trammell Crow, once a quarter or whatever, this mass email would come out and then they'd say the following people got promoted. In Sacramento, Steve Smith got promoted from assistant property manager to property manager, right? And then they say, in Portland, so-and-so got promoted to this, to this. Joe, I sat there and I one by one sent an email congratulating every single person every time. And I can't tell you how many times I get an email back and they'd say, thank you. You're the only person that congratulated me. The only one. So to me, it's like whoever's listening to this, I'd be like, right now, get on LinkedIn and make sure you're connected to every single person in your company. Your company's 10 people, great. If it's 10,000, get connected to all 10,000. Because the next 5 years, they'll change.
Mhm.
And then you end up having people all over the country, right? Like
Yep.
I have a real estate contact in every major market in America from back to my old Trammell Crow days, and probably in every major company. And it helps because you never know when you're doing a deal. But it comes back to a lot of it's just being very, very intentional, right? And I also think the last thing is just like study the generation above you. And in the last few years, because I'm 53, I've seen men who retired too early. I've seen men who have retired too late,
Yep.
and then really trying to ask really healthy questions about when's the right time and what's the healthy way to do that, you know? And so if you're 20s, like studying people in your 30s is a smart move, right? Because
Mhm.
you might think, oh, I'm not planning to have kids. Well, you might. So what does it mean to be a broker and having kids? I'm now an empty nester. What does that mean, right? And what's this new era, So I think having a relationship focus, you don't have, no one has to be formally mentoring you for them to mentor you if you are inquisitive and study them.
Yeah. Yeah, but when I'm listening to you and you're talking about taking the HR classes, see, you're already looking into the future.
Yeah,
You were thinking about, I'm building this up for the future. That's
yeah.
why you're in the classes, and that was your mindset. And you really, that mindset is what's making you successful. Is you started that at a very young age.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. And somebody says one time, it's like, why are you in the chair that you're in? Right. So you're like, why have been 20 plus years been in leadership roles? I didn't really wake up one day and like, man, I really want to be CEO of a company. That's not what happened. I really was like, I just want to do a great job and I want to be on a great team and I want to be a good person on a great team. And it kind of like happened that way because again, energy, thoughtfulness, pushing forward and doing the right thing. I one year in Vegas for ICSC with Faison, I got with my boss and I said we should do a party in Vegas with all of our people from all across the country and meet and network and be together right before the show. And he thought it was kind of a stupid idea. And so I went to the CEO and the CEO was like, man, I like that idea. And I did it. And I'll never forget, like, I had like 35 people in this room kind of get ready for Vegas. And that boss started walking the door and he's like, did anybody show up? And I'm like, yeah, nobody showed up. And he goes, really? I'm like, no, everybody showed up. And he came in. Again, there's these 35 people in there. And then the chairman of the board came in and it was really, really good. But it was one of those things like I just valued so much, like, even though I was Orlando doing Orlando deals, I wanted to know the Miami guy. I wanted to know the Charlotte guy. I wanted to know the Memphis guy, right? And I wanted them to know me. And of course, this is back like pre-internet, so it was like a lot harder.
Yeah.
Now I'm like, God, guys, like, get your name out there and hustle, you know?
Yeah. That's one thing right now, the generation that's coming into our industry. What an, think about what you and I would have paid to have the technology that they have access to now. I mean,
Yeah,
we'd have been paying thousands of dollars a month to have access to this ability to network and create content. And so I'm a firm believer in this younger generation getting into this industry because, the average age of a commercial real estate broker is pretty significant, 50s, 60s. And that's a number that I just keep hearing. It's going higher and higher every year, right?
I
And
guess.
so
Yeah.
whoever you talk to, but I think there's a real opportunity for a younger generation to really build wealth for themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Well,
just
if one of the things I'd say is like, look, there's always going to be real estate. There's always going to be wealthy people. If you have a skill set that you can run real estate for wealthy people, you're always going to have a job.
yeah,
Always going to have a job. And I'm a poor kid. I come from a low income background, and I'm not a guy that's going to inherit anything.
right.
So I had to like claw my way up, and there's never been a backup plan. So I just got to kind of always have had that mentality to make it happen. But you know what? I know how to work hard. I know how to serve. I know how to make sure people get their money. And as a baseline, that's a pretty good place to be.
Yeah, the no backup plan. That's a motivator.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah, yeah. I mean, I was actually thinking today, right before I was on this call with you, that I was like, man, I probably need some night soon to pull an all-nighter just to kind of get caught up on a bunch of stuff, right? Like there's just a lot going on, and I do that on occasion, like where I'm not going to go to bed until I get everything completely caught up. Um, Look, I don't. People make life choices. I'm not trying to put the way I'm doing thing on other people. People need to go
Sure.
down their path and their journey, what they want to be about. at the same time, I'm always trying to be honest about what is success and what success looks like. So one time I was helping lead a panel with college students back in their business, and one of the panelists said, he's like, "Well, you need to work hard." And I said, "Well, what does that mean?" And he goes, "Well, work hard." I'm like, "No, you're not defining that. Like, does work hard mean I show up at 8:30 and I work till 5 and I work hard?" Well, yeah, I think that there always comes back to there's like hours worked, right? And I kid you not, man, I was driving back from Miami from Orlando, and I had like 500 emails in my inbox. And I was thinking, golly, it'd be great if I could have somebody sit there and read the emails to me as I'm driving and like knock them out. And so I called this young guy, and I can't think of his name, that was working in our office. And I said, "Could you do this?" And I'm not kidding you. He said to me, he goes, "No, I got a kickball game I got to go to tonight."
Yeah.
I'm like, "What, you're in fourth grade?" So I called another guy, and that guy stayed with me on the phone. I drove straight from South Florida straight to the office. The whole time he was helping knock out all my emails. So I came to the office, went by, gave him a high five, went home. That guy is now one of the top brokers in Washington, D.C. He's making more money than I do. But, that, and the first guy, and if I were to track him down, I bet you he's still a junior guy, right? But, again, and if he's happy, good for him, right? He's
He could
fine.
be very happy. That's his
He's
life.
very happy.
What I want.
Yeah, that's
And
fine.
yeah.
But you got to, I was listening to somebody the other day, and they were like saying one of the biggest problems in the world is not greed, it's envy, and I'm always, what I hope for people is to have peace. If you're spending your whole life looking at other people thinking, I wish I had that, I've never bought a lottery ticket my whole life. I don't know anything about that, right?
Yeah.
I'm not, in my mind, I'm always like, if I start getting the space, like, I wish I had blank, well, let's go figure out how to get it. Let's go do it. And by the way, because I do a lot of volunteer work, it's the same thing. It's like, man, I don't know when I started pushing this hard, but 15 years ago, there's no diversity in commercial real estate. Well, you know what? Let's figure it out. And so now I have 11 endowed scholarships at 7 universities. 3 of them are historically Black colleges. And, I've made a huge investment in that space. And like, there's more diversity. And, I feel like I'm a little part of that. Lots of people have helped out in that. But you know what, man? Like, I'm not somebody that's going to sit and look at a problem and go, "Well, that sucks." I'm like, "Hey, that's not right. Let's do something." And since we have a business of entrepreneurs, a lot of them who have some extra cash, we can join together and make great impact, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, exactly. Get into your community and be a part of it. Now, I know that you go on do you go on the circuit of speaking at colleges, or do you just have specific colleges that you go speak at?
Yeah, it's a little bit of this, a little bit of that, right?
Okay.
So there's certain colleges that I do, and then certain opportunities that come up, and it's just like different schedules, whatever. And it's a great experience. I will tell you this secret. A professor told me this years ago. The students change each semester. The jokes don't have to. Like, sometimes people ask me like, "How can you give so many lectures?" And it's like, well, it's the same lecture. It's not like, I really have like 5 canned kind of lectures. But I will tell you that, I do really work really hard with college students when I'm lecturing. I try to be very transparent. And I'll give you an example is that when I was 42, I had a terrible battle with clinical depression. I mean, it felt like it was going to kill me. It was terrible. And so I tell sort of the longer version of that and how I got through it. And college students today, they appreciate that. They appreciate that vulnerability, and they appreciate that, they're able to connect with that. Some of them suffered from that. They can talk to you about it. So I really try to lead with vulnerability, and I think that for students that's helpful. I don't try to, some people are weird. Some people want to talk to college kids because they want to talk down to them. It makes them feel important.
Yeah.
Or they've got some weird agenda. I'm really trying to be an advocate for college students. That's always, I always start my lectures with like, I'm somebody who wants to be an advocate for you, and I'm trying to share things for you. I'm not trying to make you like me. I'm trying to give you the tools so you can become who you want to become.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's exactly it. Now, do you have a Q&A at the end of your speech?
I do. And I'll tell you one funny story with that. I lectured at Full Sail, and Full Sail University is a lot of artists, a lot of people in the arts. And so I did the lecture on my book. And so again, and I talked about suicide and talked about addiction and mental health, things like that. So I gave my lecture. My lecture went 45 minutes. And so they went to Q&A. man, Q&A went 45 minutes. I finally at one point had to say, guys, I have to sit down.
Yeah.
But I think they just really enjoyed, again, the honesty of the conversations, and the depth of it was pretty cool. And so I love that. Now I will tell you, the other thing I'll tell you is you find it interesting, having lectured over 30 different universities. What's the best lecturing experience? Florida A&M University, which is a historically black college university. You would love this, man. I've guest lectured multiple times. When I guest lecture there, 100% of the students are in suits. They're in suits. They're dressed professional.
Yeah.
When you say in the end, do you have any questions? 100% of the hands go up. 100%. And if you pick anybody in that room, the questions are really smart, somewhat terrifying. Like they're no joke. Like they've read your bio. And as a speaker, it creates the best environment. It's like if I had to pick a school to go back to, that's the one I would go back to, because you just feel so respected as a speaker, right? But that's another example of like people, different path, different experience. Like FAMU specifically, and a lot of HBCUs really focus on professionalism. And I've spoken at some different, I don't want to say wealthier, more prestigious schools, maybe.
Sure.
And you got kids wearing baseball caps and shorts and stuff like that, and you ask your questions, and there's no questions, right? And so, as a lecturer, guest lecturer, you're like, eh. Whereas, like here at a black college, they 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 knock your socks off. They do a great job.
You better be prepared, huh?
Better be prepared.
What are your top questions you're getting, John, when you're finishing up and with your lecture, you're opening up Q&A? What are some of the best questions you've been getting?
I want to tell you a statement first, and then I'm going to go to that because I love this. Is like shows a generational gap. I got done with a lecture in the last few years, and a student walked up to me and she looked at me and she said, "Thank you for your humanity." I thought that was a really interesting thing to say. Yeah. So later that day, I saw a retired bank president, and I told them that the woman said that, and the retired bank president looked at me and goes, "What the hell does that mean?" And I just thought that was just sort of funny, the dynamics of that, like there's a gap there. I like it when students ask me meaningful questions. Like, here's what I don't like. I don't like it when students ask me how I got into the business. And I actually won't answer that question. I'm always sort of turn around and say, look, I don't want to tell you how I got into business. I don't think it's relevant. Let's talk about how you can get in the business, right? So I think that's an easy question, but I don't think it's really helpful. I like it when a student will say to me, John, tell me about your toughest day at work. Great question. Because when I get asked that question, I pretty quick am like, ooh, I can remember this moment or that moment, right? So I like it when they start asking me questions that are a little bit more in depth. And then on the other side, here's what I'm always trying to do with students is I want them to answer two questions. Where do you want to live when you graduate? What area of the industry do you want to work in? When I ask where you want to live, most students will say anywhere. To where I say, have you been to Mississippi? I'm kidding because my wife's from Mississippi and I go to Mississippi and I love Mississippi. But my point being is,
careful now.
Careful now. You don't really mean anywhere, right? Like, right. You need to say things like, well, like I prefer Southern California, but I'm flexible. Like I prefer the East Coast, but I'm flexible. Like you can direct the conversation. I like to be in a tier 1 market, whatever. The second question, when I say, what area of the industry you want to be in, the number one answer typically from students is development. And I always tell students, like, the wealthiest people in industry are the developers. They're also the most likely to go to prison, go bankrupt, and commit suicide, right? And like, not everybody's qualified to be a developer. Like I do some development. I feel like I have part of this, the skills to be a developer. But man, the people that are really good at it, it's very, very tough. So if a student says to me, you know what, John, I've thought all about it, done research. I would like to be in office leasing in San Diego. I can help that kid. If they say, I want to be in multifamily development in Charlotte, I can help that kid. So I'm trying to get them focused, right? So then I can help them make those next steps. Then it gets to really answering questions, because if they start saying, well, I want to be in Charlotte and I want to be multifamily, I'm like, okay, well, let's start doing some work to help you find those right connections. Like one of the things I tell all college students, I'm like, join ICSC, join ULI, join NAOP as a student member. It's super cheap, right? And then start tracking their events in those cities you want to live in. So if you want to live in Houston and you're constantly studying Houston's NAOP, CSAM, Crew, all the different trails in that city, and then you could like contact them and say, hey, I'm home for summer break. Can I volunteer at your event? That helps. This is so funny, Joe. My youngest daughter is a social work major, and she just finished her freshman year of college. She's doing exactly what I'm saying, but in the social work world, completely working. She went on Facebook and she posted on social work through one of my contacts. She found out about something. She's like, hey, can I volunteer? She's doing an internship right now for a mental health alliance and just recently volunteered at an event where she got to meet Ashley Judd, who's the keynote speaker. And so she's using the same real estate hustle in social work, right? But she's just being assertive and leaning forward and networking and getting out there. And you never know where that goes. But the hustle to sell yourself, that's the kid you want to hire to do deals because you got to hustle to do deals, right?
Yeah.
It's funny if you think about talking to a college kid and you're like, tell me about your week, and they might say, oh, I'm taking calculus. It's every Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 9 to 9:50. And I'm like, okay, you did calculus every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 9 to 9:50. Got it. Well, here's what real estate's like. When's the class? Don't know. Who's teaching it? I don't know, but I think he's in San Francisco. Okay, well, what are we supposed to be learning? Something like so much of what you and I do, it's never that, right? It's never in this linear box, right? It's all this other stuff. And I've seen people who were straight A students in college, magna cum laude, fail. And I've seen kids, like I'm dyslexic, so I struggle with all kinds of stuff, do really well because we understand how to, move things around and connect the dots, right? Yeah. And by the way, with all this, I take a ton of calculated risk, a ton.
Oh.
Now, I don't take crazy risks, like I wouldn't let my wife cut my hair. I'm kidding, right? Like I'm joking around. But I take a lot of risk. And my dad was a pastor and civil rights leader. And so, I've grown up doing a lot of work, dealing with race. I remember I got called and this woman said, hey, can you come on camera live on TV and do an interview about racism? And I said, sure. Now, was that risky? Yeah, but it was calculated, right? Like It's a subject matter I'm comfortable with, right? Or me talking about mental health, that's risky. That's risky. Some people might be like, wow, John, you're talking about that. Maybe that makes me uncomfortable. I get it, but it's calculated. I have services and brokerage, but I'm also an owner and I own properties, right? When you write that first check, oh my gosh, it's scary. When you have a capital call, it's scary, right? Yeah. When you're trying to decide whether to invest or not invest, right? So, there's no part of it's easy. It's hard. And so the calculated risk of, being on a podcast, right? Like, there's risk to that. Sure. There's, if you're going to get out there and hustle, we do expert witnessing work and we do receivership, right? And so, I spend some time, hustling and reaching out to lawyers and just remind them, hey, we do this work, right? And so you got to be okay, maybe looking stupid, maybe looking whatever, right?
Yeah.
But that's you have to take risk. That's part of it, right? And you get muscle memory over time, but like I bet you and I could meet tomorrow and go to any conference in the world and walk around and find some business out of it. I bet you we could, right?
Yeah.
But part of it is you and I would have no problem walking up to someone we don't know and being like, hey, how are you? My name's John. What are you doing? And just start talking. But the first time I did it, I felt like I was going to throw up, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like,
me too.
I mean, it doesn't come naturally. It's a skill set you and I've learned over time.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to learn how to talk to people. Matter of fact, I just put a video out a couple of weeks ago with Derek Borthwick about how to talk to him. It's a great book, but it really taught you a lot from how to communicate with people and body language, and which is also very important. But John, I want to go back to one thing. When you're lecturing, are you seeing more women and minorities that are finding interest in commercial real estate now?
100%, yes. When I was in college, I remember all of my real estate classes were all white, and they were probably, if there was 50 students, it was 48 white males, right? So,
Yeah.
that's how that was. It is far more diverse now, and for women and men, it's getting closer to like 50 to 50, and there's diversity in pretty much every single class that I'm in, and that's really important. Now, I will tell you, when you said, John, tell me about a big dream you have. My big dream is to make sure that every single historically black college in America has the ability to offer real estate classes if they want to. So I mentioned I have real estate scholarships at 3 HBCUs. I only have 97 more to do, right? So there's 100 of them.
Right.
And if anybody here this wants to partner with me, I'm like, let's get it on, let's bring it on. As a side note, I did a white paper for both the Obama administration and I did for the Trump administration at both of their requests. And it's about how the lack of real estate education in the Black community was a gap in the civil rights movement, and then really working to address that through the network of HBCUs. And so, we want to do more and more of that. Students, they not every student graduate needs to know how to be a nurse or play the trombone or be an engineer, all the major degrees that we have, but everyone's got to live someplace. Like everybody's got to know, how to read an apartment lease and buy a home, stuff like that. So I do think real estate education, across the board and making sure that's offered to more people. One of the things I talk about in my lectures is the famous book Pride and Prejudice, and of course, one of my daughter's favorite movies, Pride, Prejudice, and Zombies, which is adding a little twist to it.
Might be a
But if
little
you know
different.
yeah, a little different. But if you know the premise of that, there's a guy and he's married, and he's got a bunch of daughters, and he knows that when he dies, his daughters can't inherit his real estate. So he's got to marry them off, and so that they then can get the real estate, right? But that real estate ownership has been a way to control wealth and power across the world since the beginning of time. So the education of real estate, think about the term landlord, right? Like, what are
Yeah.
we talking about? I mean, it's a big deal. And so again, not everyone needs to be in our industry, but I would argue that most people need to have some level of understanding of what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, um, how do you think you were talking about colleges, you really got my wheels spinning there. How do you think that we attract more young talent to commercial real estate brokerage? What should we be doing?
Well, I would tell you that the number one thing I would do if I was listening to this and I was like somewhere in the country where there was a college and there wasn't a real estate program, here's my advice, is start a real estate club. Start a real estate club. I know the university that had a real estate class and they actually shut it down because a lack of students signed up for the course, right? And so, but if you get a real estate club, what happens is you get the students engaged. And once the students see it and feel it and understand it, and by the way, wherever I've seen this happen, where I've been helpful in instituting a real estate club at university, it's gone like gangbusters, right? Because the kids get experience in leadership, somebody's a president, vice president, treasurer, that kind of thing. But then at an organic level, they're seeing all different jobs. Part of that is that when people think of real estate, people say, "Oh yeah, my mom does that on weekends," right? They tend to sometimes think of like being a realtor, and I'm always like, guys, real estate's a pie, and being a resident real estate broker, which by the way is a very admirable business to be in, it's one slice. There's all these other slices, and so when I talk to students, I'm always like, tell me the coolest retail store you like to go into. Name it. What is that? What is a cool store you like to go into? And I let it get quiet, and students will say whatever they say. I don't know. What do they say? Abercrombie. They say, Trader Joe's. Like whatever they say. Target. They say Publix. Whatever the companies they say. And I'm like, well, you realize that company has a real estate department. Like, and so some kid might say, well, I think a cool company is Facebook or Apple or Microsoft. I'm like, don't you know they all have real estate departments? Does Starbucks have a real estate department? All of them have real estate departments. All of them. So you could work for the coolest corporations you could possibly think of doing real estate. And that blows their minds, like that standpoint. I say it like this, like you think about there's institutional real estate, there's corporate real estate. Corporate is the use of real estate, institutional is investment real estate. So you could go work for JP Morgan doing stock investing, or you go to work for JP Morgan real estate investing. You could work for a corporation that's doing HR management, or you could work for real estate. So Walmart and Publix own a ton of real estate, corporately, it's also institutionally get a return on it, but corporately they own it because they use it, right? And so understanding that how big the pie is, or when I do presentations, I show a slide and I show like a picture of, Manhattan. I said, look at all these towers. Like somebody runs every single one of those buildings. Like you go look at any skyscraper anywhere in the world, look at it and go, someone's leasing it. Someone's in charge of collecting rent. Someone's in charge of making sure the elevators are working, right? And then you look at pictures of industrial buildings, right? And like somebody's trying to make sure all those roll-up doors are working, like
Mm-hmm.
and breaking that down. And then looking at retail. And of course, that's been my world. And I'm like, guys, I love retail because I love meeting with people who are national retailers. I love meeting regional retailers. And I love meeting a mom and pop that was born in another country and came here and started a restaurant. And by golly, they're making it happen. I think that's the coolest thing ever, right? So I think that making sure they understand this broad industry we have, that's totally awesome. And you can work in a lot of different areas of our industry.
Yeah. I was talking to
It's
a
not
young
one
person.
thing, right?
Right. It doesn't have to be. I was talking to this young person the other day, and she was, well, I'm not sure about real estate. She was hemming and hawing about, I think I want to do something to really help build my community. I said, well, commercial real estate is the ideal business to build your community, because you can be bringing tenants in or helping people find this community. You can help them get established in the community. It's all about community.
Mhm.
So she hadn't thought of it like that.
Well, it's funny. I actually lectured at a conference right before COVID, and it was a diversity in real estate conference, actually at Columbia University. It was really good. The only thing that was kind of negative to me was there was probably 500 people there, and predominantly Black. Overwhelmingly, it was people working for HUD and affordable housing and things like
Mm.
that. And I was like, you know what? That's good, but that again, it's a narrow segment of our business. It's kind of like when you first had the opportunity for Black people in America to go to law school, and then like they become like a public defender, and you're like, well, that's cool and it's admirable, but we need some Black lawyers to become you know the, somewhere in an area of law that they're making a ton of money,
Mhm.
because then they can give money back and be part of it. So the same way, it's like when we're talking diversity, it's like we don't want them all working for nonprofits. We need them working in profitable places so they can make that impact. But to your point, like, man, if somebody's working for a developer and they're building huge projects, like the way they can shape a community and impact it, oh
Mhm.
my gosh, like
Yeah.
how they can impact the school system, how it impacts law enforcement. I've done these things again. You talk about race, like I was lecturing a group and I said, listen, one of the things you learn when you own real estate is the cops work for you. The cops work for you. When they had those terrible issues in Ferguson, it was something crazy, like 75% of the residents were like renters and not registered to vote, things like that. If you don't care and you're disconnected, and then that's one thing. But like if you own, and also you're like, wow, that's an F-rated school, that's a problem. If it becomes an A-rated school, your net worth goes up, right?
Yeah.
And you're paying these taxes, and you're like, hey, those cops are not doing a good job. Listen to this story, Joe. I had a group of pastors, Black pastors, contact me after the whole thing with George Floyd, and they said, can you give us some advice on what to do in law enforcement and things like that? There was a ton of it. There was like 100 different pastors across the country on this call. I said, listen to me. I said, invite your local chief of police, sheriff, whoever they are, law enforcement to your church, and invite them, have them sit there, pray for them. After church, have a potluck meal and feed them and talk to them and hang out with them and their families. And then you make sure they do a great job. If they don't, you vote them out. You fire them.
Yeah.
And they were kind of shocked at that last part. I said, guys, I'm not joking. Like,
Yeah.
build a relationship and love and be kind. But if they're not doing the job, fire them.
Yeah.
That's it, right? That's how the real world works. That's how it
Yeah.
works, right?
We own
But
some
real estate has a
properties.
part of that. Real estate has a part of that. If you
Oh,
own
yeah.
it and you're paying taxes, you're like, wait, I'm paying for that. I'm paying. I expect a return if I'm paying for it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. We had some properties in a lower income area here in Los Angeles. And if it wasn't for the local police department down there, it was, when we bought the buildings, it was tough.
Yeah,
And, they didn't do it with force. They did it they knew everybody. They went out
right.
and communicated. I mean, there was gang members standing outside of the properties. These police officers knew them, and they would be there. And, it really And together, working with the law enforcement, we cleaned about a 4 block area up pretty nicely. And it really
Awesome.
helped. The turnover at the elementary school there decreased. And, the community, there weren't gunshots every night. There wasn't drug dealing on every corner. But that was a lot of it was us picking up the phone and having a conversation, going and talking to the police officer. So you're spot on. It's having that willingness to communicate. And I think,
Yeah.
in our business, John, communication is the crux of the whole thing, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
It's telling people what you're looking for, telling people what you want, because in this industry, we've all been through it. Most people are there to help you get going in this industry. They want a younger generation to come in. They're willing to help.
Well, one last thing, real quick, Joe, just if I can mention this from a big picture perspective, is well, two things. First one is on relationships. And a lot of times you'll hear in our people say it's a relationship business. And people say that, but I think sometimes what they mean is they're seeking a charity business. People say it's relationship, but they're really kind of talking about themselves. They want to benefit. They don't necessarily think about giving. And I say it like this: it's like, what is charity? Charity is giving and expecting nothing in return. Charity is typically in a crisis situation. If some woman worked for you and she showed up at your house on a Saturday night with a bloody nose, and she ran into your home and she said, "My boyfriend just punched me in the face. I ran out. My car keys on my purse on my like." It's a crisis. You would help her, right?
Mm-hmm.
If that happened every single Saturday, you'd be like, "Time out. This is getting weird, right?" So it's one-sided. It's temporary. It's a crisis situation. So what is a relationship? A relationship is not that. A relationship is two-sided, right? The art of a great conversation is look at me, how are you? Look at me, how are you, right? If you never ask somebody how they're doing, like you're not really in a real relationship, or they never ask you about you. If it's always about them, there's that. So when I tell young people, like if you're looking to have a mentor, do you want a mentor relationship or do you want to be a mentor charity case? Right. I mean, look, if you contact me the week before your graduation and you're like, I'm freaking out, I don't have a job, I'll help you. But that's me treating you like a charity case. And that at some point I'll stop answering your phone call. But if you treat me like a relationship, like if you reach out to me and I help you give a lead and all of a sudden I look and you've given my book a review on Amazon, okay, right? I mean, like, you need to stay in balance. If you're asking for help from somebody and you get it, how are you going to give back? And so students have said to me sometimes, well, I don't know how to give back. I'm like, well, figure it out. I mean, write a thank you note, offer to volunteer at their office, do something, find some way to give back, right?
Yep.
You know, I always want to have like deep emotional bank account deposits. It's like really matters to me. And because I do have to ask for withdrawals sometimes and ask for help for some people,
Sure.
but I want to be a guy that's always trying to be there and trying to help people out.
Yeah.
And I think some people, again, like it's a relationship business, they're only looking at it through how they can receive. Only.
Yeah.
And that's just never going to last that long.
And people can read into that.
Oh,
There's a young guy that I know. Actually, he's not that young anymore, but he was in, I believe it was Wyoming. He's asked this guy to mentor him. And the guy said, yeah, I'll be happy to mentor you, but I don't really have anything. You can just follow me around. He goes, well, I'm not going to do it for free. He goes, what can I do for you? And he
hmm.
goes, well, we need to dig ditches to lay these lines. He goes, I'm in. I'll be there tomorrow.
Awesome.
Started digging
Wow.
ditches for this guy. Ended up working for the guy. Guy ended up selling the company to Kirk. Kirk,
Hmm.
now if you go Google Kirk Fernandez and all the companies he owns, it started there by having a relationship that, he didn't just ask for something, he gave something back. And I think that's important in real estate as well. If you're going to
Hmm.
be looking for a mentor, be very clear about what kind of mentor you're looking for, and then make sure you're giving back. If they're our age, I'll throw us both under the bus. They're
Yeah.
our age and maybe they're not very good on, content creation or social media or digital marketing. Offer to do it for them. Give them
Yeah.
something back. You'll be
Yeah.
surprised how it
Yeah.
works.
Look, man, Florida ICSC is coming up and I've got a booth. And I've been reaching out to the people who have the booths around me that I know and saying, hey, look, we're gonna have booths right next to each other. How can I help promote your company?
Yep.
You're like, what, I'm gonna do a post, and I can do a post standing at my booth, looking at your booth, and you're an architectural firm or you're a roofing company or whatever. Like, I'm doing my thing, but we're gonna see each other 2 days in a row. We're gonna be standing right by each other. How can I help promote what you're going on? And
That's beautiful.
and guess what? Like their first response is, what? Like no one's ever
Yeah.
said, and then thank you. But it's one of those things where it's like, that's who I want to be. Look, I want my business to grow, and I want your business to grow, and I want all the business that we're touching. I want it all to kind of rise it up together, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that fun? Super
It's the
fun.
mindset you need to have. There's plenty of business for everybody,
Right.
and if you're out there supporting your community, you're going to get something back at some point. Don't expect it, but when it does, be thankful that it came in.
That's right.
So,
That's absolutely right.
well,
Okay.
John, I was supposed to do 30 minutes with you. We're at almost an hour.
Oh, get out of here. We got to.
I didn't want to take that much of your time, but we got talking, and I think it's very valuable for our followers. I'm going to put your contact information down below. I am going to put a link to your book on Amazon.
Thank you.
And make sure you do check out the Crossman Conversation, his podcast, and we'll put a link to that as well, John. So thank you very much for taking the time today.
It's my pleasure. Please stay in touch, and I'm honored to be a resource.
All right. Thank you very much. And for those of you watching, if you could, please give us a like. And if you haven't done so, make sure you subscribe.